Conference. Maybe you know this picture, maybe the Chileans are familiar with this picture. This is the Project Cinco. It was a project in the 70s of the government of Salvador Allende. It was the Chilean internet before the ARPANET even. So, and it was ended up with the dictatorship in 1973 in the 60s. It was created by a famous scientist, Stafford Beer, you know, the wonderful cybernetic guy, English. Well, I will introduce my presentation. I wanted to introduce my presentation with this beautiful picture because to motivate you to know this history, particularly for the outsiders. So, opportunities and challenges. This is the outline of my presentation. I will read my presentation, otherwise I will talk for an hour and will say nothing. So, my presentation is my argument. My argument in this presentation is that after 1 decade and a half of actual global functioning of digital social media, and in social media, of course, we can include social networks, the internet, the digital platforms that we use every day, the algorithms, and of course, the emerging generative. So after a decade, we are facing a radical change in our personal and social relations. So we move from the communication between persons, among us, and organizations, to communications between entities, algorithms and different electronic things, where we cannot easily identify human mediations. This change has profound consequences on at least 3 levels, I want to argue. At the level of social memory, we are facing the problem of the impossibility of forgetting in the internet, a problem that radically changes the function of social memory as we know it and affects individual rights. At the level of politics, my second level, a new form of politics in our society, in our world society, is emerging, the platform digital party. So, Meloni in Italy, the Partido de la Gente in Chile. The platform digital party and the digital democracy, so to speak, that replaces representative democracy and switches from the doctrinal guidance, traditional doctrinal guidance we had in traditional parties, to a non-mediated post-democratic age, a post-democratic age that we are facing today without trust in politics, with an instrumental commitment with social institutions, with political institutions. And the third level, the level of truth. The problem at this level of truth is not fake news, I would argue, as everyone assumes, I would say. Fake news exists from the time of the mass media. Just remember the Nazi propaganda, for example. It's not fake news the problem, but the construction of these small social worlds in where we live in today. Small social worlds without interconnections among them, and therefore with no possibility of moral recognition between these people. A form of decentralized antagonism and multipolar polarization, as we face today, emerges from these conditions. So let me unfold these 3 arguments. If we take a brief look in the evolution of societal communication, we can observe that every new communication media produces a new form of society. So the printing press, the printing press lies, in the first line we have the diffusion media, and the second line we have different forms of society. The printing press lies at the basis of the emergence of modern society. The diffusion of meaning through books introduces the virus of decentralized interpretations. Everyone becomes the author, each of you, each of us, becomes the author of their own thoughts and communication. A few centuries later, the religious and monarchic control of symbols and politics collapsed. Meanwhile, the mass media in the 20th century led to mass propaganda in totalitarianism, but also to democratic pluralism in the Western world, in our world. The digital communication of the 21st century turned into an actual experience the fact that we live in one single world society. The experience, this global experience, is for every one of us, is climate change, for example, the financial crisis, the last financial crisis, 2008, was a global experience, and of course, in the last 4 years, the pandemic. These are the topics of our global experience today. On the other hand, digital social media has produced multipolar identitarian echo chambers. So from the believers in the flat earth to the believers in God. So another particular group today, the believers in God. These reproduce themselves in opposition to one another. So Niklas Luhmann, a German sociologist, Niklas Luhmann's sentence in the 90s, and I quote, "What we know about our society, about the world we live in, we know it through the mass media." This sentence, I would say, today is more valid than ever. It is also true that our knowledge about the world and ourselves has increased in the last decades. However, the more specialized our knowledge becomes, the more ignorance we have to face. For the specialization of a few becomes the ignorance of the many. Ignorance comes not from bad education or lazy people, as we can assume, but from us as a specialist. One day we read that the tea is good for blood circulation, and on the next day that it produces anemia. One day we read that the central bank should lower the interest rates, and the next day we read that the lowering was irresponsible. So they are not fake news indeed, but small social worlds communicating in social media without coordination among them. Regretfully, there is no other possibility today for us than dealing with this uncertainty of digital communication, but then and again, one can overreact or search for adequate risk approaches. As in the film Terminator, one can replace the Skynet with Google today and predict a future dystopia of dominance and individual control by the corporation, as Shoshana Zuboff does, the American sociologist. This type of apocalyptic diagnosis undergoes an ontological fallacy, namely that society does not react to itself, that it remains in the same place, so that the current situation will be the same in the future. However, capitalism has historically proved that it can improve itself. It introduced central banks to regulate money, developed soft law regulations to cope with supranational exchange. It introduces also 3 versions of the well-known for you Basel Accords to deal with new financial architectures. And today we witness the emerging regulations in many regions and countries to face the challenge of digital media and generative artificial intelligence. So instead of predicting future dystopias, the risk approach is more useful. The question, and this is important, the question is not when there will be a generative artificial intelligence. We already have the GPT-4. But what is the minimum level of risk we can accept in dealing with social media and artificial intelligence? This is the risk approach. So let's see. One unacceptable risk is not developing a safety theory to protect all what we value in a pluralistic democratic society, in our society, in the Western world at least. We value free market concurrence, so we cannot accept digital monopolies, for example. We value individual freedom, so we cannot accept subliminal control techniques through algorithmic communication. And we value equality, so we cannot accept that machine learning techniques reproduce human biases in our datasets. We value also knowledge, of course, so we cannot accept stopping technological development altogether. Let me revise some illustrations. So we all probably remember the case of the Spanish citizen Mario Costeja in 2014, who filed a lawsuit before the European Court of Justice asking for Google Spain to remove information on a forced sale of his property arising from social security debts. The problem had been resolved, say Costeja, so the debt was no longer relevant. The ruling of the European Court of Justice stated that the right to privacy overrules public interest. So in every decent world, decent country, it would be that way. So personal information is more relevant than the right to others to know this information. Privacy is more relevant to the access to the information. So the judgment considered Google accountable for this excess of memory in the digital age. Yet Google claimed that they, the people at Google, have not knowledge on this data, that they are ignorant about the data, in this case, of this data. So they do not control them. The search algorithm just works by human request, but when it operates, no humans are involved in this relation, communication from entity to entity. The court replied that even if Google has no control over data, it delivers a structured profile of each person which affects privacy in a more dangerous way. However, the problem is that Google can delete a particular link but not the information. So a refined search of every one of us can find the same deleted information in other links. So the conclusion is, Internet does not forget. This is a new experience of our last decades. Our conventional theory of social memory is that memory is not an archive, so that social memory must forget to remember, and always remembers differently. But with the algorithmic memory, we have another situation. On the contrary, algorithmic memory cannot forget anything and can retrieve the same information once and again. This is a new real problem for the right to privacy and for the right to be forgotten. Here we have some data about the right to be forgotten. I found in the internet, of course. So, in every file that is lawsuit that has been directed to Google. Estonia is in the third place, then France, the Netherlands, Liechtenstein, and Sweden. And data also from the transparency policy of Google. All the topics that are related with this problem of the right to be forgotten on Google. So, the second topic, politics. So, knowledge has always been relevant to politics. We may agree that the very foundation of the nation-state does not rely on violence, which is only applied in particular cases, so in cases of rebellion, riots, and against crime. The foundation of the nation-state relates much more on data and information. The management of data and its transformation into knowledge allows for a responsive state regarding citizens' demands and also for control before rebellion. Today we have a wonderful opportunity to supplement our knowledge through artificial intelligence, to identify the biases in our datasets, and to train efficient algorithms that do not reproduce human stupidity with artificial stupidity. Some studies, for example, have shown how barriers to health access and poverty in the African American population produce a blind spot in the datasets that leads algorithms to exclude African American population from health benefits and even consider them not needing enough medical care. The same goes for lower classes and indigenous people in Latin America, not only in healthcare, but also in education, credit scoring, and insurance. The simplistic reasoning is they are not taking part of systems, so they don't need them. We have accumulated at least a century of social deviations in our data sets. So blaming now algorithms for being biased is to blame ourselves for historical discrimination we have committed. With artificial intelligence, we now have the opportunity to correct this systematic moral problem we have produced. However, we face a major problem. The loss of trust in political institutions and the crisis of representative democracy have not been produced by social media, but they are not helping. In modern politics, social media allow for the identitary enclosure of communication. They consolidate a form of fragmentation in which each group resonates in itself and excludes different dissident voices. As in ancient, simple cultures, digital political communities are constituted by a trivial distinction between homogenization of their own members and opposition to outsiders. The problem is not, again, the infamous fake news, because under these conditions of multipolar oppositions, every communication of group A is fake for B, for C, and for D. The problem is that there is no doctrine, no rationality, or reflexivity in those groups that may guide decisions and behavior. Everything is a matter of spontaneous emotionality that divides the world between friends and enemies. And the new enemies of these identitarian groups are the immigrants, for example, the LGBTQ+ people, the capitalists, of course, as ever, the central bankers, the elite of experts, so everyone here in this room, and of course also the traditional politics. In this context, the digital public sphere becomes a post-democratic platform for aggressive particularism, hate speeches, instrumental interest, and political forum shopping for selecting the candidate for today and another candidate for tomorrow. So no wonder then that populism, authoritarianism, nationalism, and religious fundamentalism are becoming dominant, even in traditional political parties, as the immigrant crisis in Chile, in the USA, and Europe shows daily. That is the problem of politics. Here we have some data also from digital associations that are detrimental and beneficial for liberal democracy. So in orange, the detrimental for liberal democracy. As you can see, there is a lot of, yeah, but this is more interesting. So detrimental and beneficial in every country. You can see there, so guess what country is with more orange the color. There is, of course, the USA. And this is also a negative sentiments between the difference between negative sentiments in official networks of our digital party in Chile, the Partido de la Gente. The negative sentiments are in red, so they are very low in the official networks, but in the members network is in the first place the negative sentiments that we can measure in these social networks. And the last point, the truth. The expression fake news we have talked today is just a manifestation of the ignorance gap between the well-known conditions of our daily experience as individuals and the world as a whole. The encompassing system, the whole system, the world society, is too large and too complex to be immediately understandable. No local experience gives an adequate representation of this society, so every representation of those identitarian groups may be fake for others. But again, since we value freedom of expression, we have to live with the ignorance of others and with our own ignorance as a specialist. The question is not how to eliminate fake news. It is not how to control the internet or how to control the social media. But what are, again, the unacceptable risks? For example, one unacceptable risk is the generalization of the idea in the social media that democracy doesn't matter. However, since we value freedom of expression, we have to accept the risk and the communications of the supporters of populism and authoritarianism. Another unacceptable risk is to control the web, as in Russia, China, or Venezuela, for example, to control the web. But we also value free market concurrence. We also value individual autonomy. We also value equality, and of course we value knowledge. So we simply cannot accept that. We cannot control social media, we cannot delete fake news. And these are another. So this is interesting, this people feeling, ending in 1 minute, people feeling false information. The whole world feels that we are facing false information, so of course. But when they are asked about to what extent, they say, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? In the statement, social media companies have too much power, 81%. But when they are asked, I cannot imagine life without the internet, so you can see how green are the responses of the people. No one can live without the internet. But everyone assumes that we are facing false information. This is a paradox of our times, and the techniques of risk, the risk approach is much more useful to deal with this problem at the paranoia of the end of the world because of the artificial intelligence and the ChatGPT. So thank you very much. There are the conclusions. You can read it.
I think we have time for 5 minutes. 5 minutes for questions. I don't know if you have questions from the audience for our panelists.
Hello, my name is Lautaro Diaz. Thanks to all for the presentations. I got a question for Luis Deles. About Statflix. The idea was to encourage students to enter to the bank or just to present what it's doing on the bank. Also, I got a doubt about how many people took to build the course and how many hours. Thank you.
So we can take 2 questions. Over there.
Okay. See, good morning to everyone. Thanks for the presentations. I have a question both to Mr. Luis Teles and Mr. Fernando Rocha, which is, in a comparative way to past days, what's the role of technology in communication statistics to economic agents nowadays? What are the principal gains? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? One more. Okay.
Morning. This question is for Sandra Cannon. We see today an increase of availability of data, especially in data from non-traditional sources. I want to know your thoughts about the challenge that this new data poses and what we can do as central bank toward that topic. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go for the first round.
You want me to go first?
Yes, you go first.
Well, there goes the rest of your time. So that's an excellent question, and it's actually one of the driving things that is making a lot of central banks and other organizations think more clearly about formal data governance, because the whole notion of understanding what the data that you're getting in and what does fit for purpose mean, that's often been something that people have tried to capture when we think about economic statistics, when we think about a lot more of the traditional time series based aggregate data, right? What can you use it for? What can't you use it for? One of the things that I've seen organizations across the spectrum struggle with is they've got access to all kinds of data, especially administrative records, sensor data, all of these non-traditional forms, and there's a desire to just plug those data types into our traditional mechanisms without a really good understanding that that's not why they were collected in the first place. And so bridging the gap between operational or transactional data collections and the ability to use those in an analytic environment is one of the big things that people, I think, organizations are struggling with, because it does get to what are the permitted uses? What does it look like when we're talking about decision rights? Who gets to decide whether that particular set of information from oil pipelines, for example, making this up, measures what we think it measures in order to be able to forecast energy demand, things like that. So this is where having a more organized and formal data governance approach and conversations to allow the people who understand the data to communicate better with the people who are trying to figure out what the appropriate uses are. I hope that answered your question.
Luis?
Okay, so I had two questions. So the first one, I don't know if I understood well, but probably, so these StatFlix were developed to give to the universities to be integrated in their curricula. But it is also intended to be used by the bank staff. Okay, so in fact, any employee of the bank can use it, so it is integrated in the catalog of courses of our BDP Academy, so anyone can do it, so there is no obstacles for that. Regarding the figures that I was asked, I'm not in the conditions to give you an answer, because, as I told you, it starts for real just this month with the beginning of the current school year. So we know that 16 schools of economics from different universities in the countries have included this course in their curricula. Some of them will be in courses during the first semesters, the others in the second semester. So I regret to say, but we probably would only get some statistics about how many students took the courses and what's the average time that they needed to do the course, I would say by the end of the first semester. So in January probably we will have some figures on that, but these are obviously important figures that we want to know. I think I did not forget anything.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, there was a second question. Yeah, that's the question of the technology in communication. So what I would like to say about this is, I think in modern communication, you do not have to impose the way your user will consume will have to consume the information. I think you have to adapt to the way he's used to consume that information. So, and in a technological world that we are living today, I think we have take in very serious consideration the role of technology if we really want to be reached by the audience that we want to communicate with. So I think it's clearly very important. Of course, the content and the way you express your message obviously are very important, but you cannot ignore technology.
Thank you.
Okay, good. I agree with Luis, and beginning with the last part of your question. The main gains for us to invest in these broader channels, technological channels for communicating statistics, is to reach a broader audience. It is an objective to be pursued, and the second point is try to improve statistical literacy, the capacity of understanding numbers and interacting in society and getting the right information. I think it's pretty much important and according to the fundamental principles of the United Nations. I think we get limited results yet, and the way forward, I think, is to invest more on this, get the feedbacks, and try to continue on this venue. But this is only talking about technology in communicating statistics. There's also a part of producing statistics, and technology is in our everyday life, and it affects, or it defines the way people connect to each other, the way we transact. And this recording economic transactions is an important or fundamental part of what we do. We cannot say that, as the famous quote, I can see productivity everywhere, less on the productivity statistics. We cannot say that we can see technology everywhere, less in statistics. That's why the challenge for us all in the statistic community is to include them. And one of the main aspects of the current ongoing revision of SNA standards and BPM standards is precisely digitalization. That is a major challenge for us, and that is the important aspect of technology, both and the economic agents for statistics, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, Aldo, if you want to say...
Maybe a final message. So we also feel always motivated by knowledge in research, in policy, in politics, everywhere. So, but when we put the focus only on knowledge, we miss the blind spot, and the blind spot is ignorance. So I would invite you, all we that work with data, all we that work with research and data, so to put an emphasis on ignorance, to see ignorance, to see the blind spot, the other side of knowledge, so to observe what we cannot observe, because in this blind spot are the answers to a better future, to unlock the future, so to speak.
Thank you very much. I think that your last comment is, I will take it the following way. A significant fraction of central banks around the world has been granted with independence. And we, central banks, take that not as something that is given. We are accountable. We are accountable to citizens. And in that implies that we need to generate better information, better analysis every day in order to fulfill this commitment that we have with the society. And I think that what we have seen in the most recent decades in terms of the ability to generate new data in central banks and in other different institutions, but let me center on central bank, has been, I mean, something phenomenal, something that we didn't see before. Before we were basically working on improving the quality of the data that we were supposed to produce. And now you have central banks around the world thinking about the generation of new data, the new information that clearly allow us to have better understanding of what is happening with the economy, improving our policies, the implementation of policies that we, as we discussed before, but also it has generated significant challenges in terms of the governance of the data. But I think that also allow us somehow to try to go in the direction that you mentioned, no? In the direction of generating new information that can be used by researchers in order to try to answer or to provide a response to those levels of ignorance that somehow we have. So those levels of ignorance somehow can be also the result of no information regarding different issues. So I think that this panel has been extremely useful to think about the issues that for many of the participants are critical for the implementation of very statistical creation at central bank level. So thank you very much again for your participation.
Thank you.